Public Enemies is a movie based on a book which was based on actual events. We'll take a look at how closely the events in the film coincide with the true story of crime during the Great Depression. Even though the film didn't get everything exactly right, it did nail down some surprisingly precise details about one of the most notorious bank robbers in American history. This movie tells a compelling story, but by the time the credits start rolling, many fans were left wondering how much of what they saw on the screen actually happened in real life. We'll take a look at which elements of the film don't quite match up with the true story, but surprisingly, it's a lot fewer than you might think.
And those of you who aren't prepared for that should go.
Let's start out with the big dramatic scene in which Christian Bale's FBI special agent Melvin Purvis brings down Channing Tatum's pretty boy Floyd. This famously real bank robber's real name was Charles Arthur Floyd, and he did indeed meet a rather messy end at the hands of law enforcement, just not the way we saw happen in Public Enemies. It took a few rounds, but Agent Purvis managed to bring down Floyd, who used his last breath to fire off a verbal parting shot. It was a powerful moment for Bale's character, but unfortunately, it could be less than realistic. Purvis did lead a group of police and FBI agents in pursuit of Floyd, but accounts vary regarding what actually happened. Some believe police officer Chester Smith was responsible for the loss of Floyd, but Smith claims he only wounded him before the FBI stepped in and took over.
There is nothing mysterious about the manner in which the Federal Bureau of Investigation works.
He said Agent Herman Hollis was responsible, while the FBI stated Hollis wasn't even present, and that two of their other agents had taken care of Floyd. Although Smith said Floyd did have some less than friendly words for Purvis, the agent did not personally eliminate him like we saw in Public Enemies. Another minor detail here is that the final confrontation was actually in a cornfield and not in an apple orchard. And supposedly, Floyd's last words were, "I'm done for, you've hit me twice." It's no Rosebud, but it was an accurate statement. In fact, the movie kind of glossed over just how much the FBI didn't want to cooperate with local law enforcement. When Dillinger and his associates escaped the Little Bohemia Lodge, we saw officials fail to put up proper roadblocks, and it was dismissed as a simple mistake. While that's certainly believable, nobody's perfect after all, it doesn't really tell the whole story. J. Edgar Hoover wanted the credit for Dillinger's capture, which meant he didn't want his men sharing the glory with local law enforcement. The FBI could have asked for help securing the roads and preventing Dillinger's escape, but they chose not to, rather than risk Hoover's ire. The bigger issue with the Pretty Boy Floyd scene is the overall timeline of events. In the movie, Pretty Boy Floyd is taken out while John Dillinger is still alive, but in real life, Pretty Boy Floyd survived 3 months after the end of John Dillinger, because after Dillinger was brought down, Floyd was #1 on the FBI's most wanted list. And pretty much the whole relationship between Purvis and Dillinger was invented for the purposes of this movie. Purvis obviously wasn't known for taking down Pretty Boy Floyd because 1, he hadn't, and 2, Floyd was still alive at this point. Purvis and Dillinger never met, and as far as we know, they've never even spoken to each other. Purvis was on the scene when Dillinger was finally brought down, but he wasn't even the agent leading the investigation at the time.
I'm headed for the last roundup.
Now let's look at John Dillinger's arrest in Tucson, Arizona and transfer to Indiana. Naturally, it was big news, and the journalists in the movie are actual reporters. But then Dillinger uses his wits and a wooden weapon to convince the guards to help him escape. It's the kind of scene that seems like it had to have been cooked up for the big screen, but this is one of those occasions when truth is crazier than fiction. According to Public Enemies director Michael Mann, he had to tone down the brazen escape of John Dillinger because he feared nobody would ever believe what actually happened. There is actually some debate about whether Dillinger used an actual weapon or a carved one, but according to Mann, he took 17 officers hostage instead of a handful we saw in the movie. Also, Dillinger claimed multiple lives in the film, but in actuality, the only person we know that fell out of his hands was an officer named William Patrick O'Malley, who lost his life during a holdup in Indiana. Don't get me wrong, Dillinger was absolutely a criminal, and there were people who lost their lives in connection to his various misdeeds, but he was a bank robber who was only ever charged with the loss of Officer O'Malley. In the beginning of the movie, it's a beautiful day in 1933 when Dillinger dramatically frees his allies from the Indiana State Penitentiary. In reality, it was actually raining that day, but that's an incredibly minor detail. The important difference is that Dillinger wasn't actually there. He did work to help his friends escape, but his plan didn't require him to be on the scene. He worked to smuggle certain persuasive items into his friends' hands so they could escape on their own. How did he get those items into prison? Nobody knows for sure, but some suggest that he tossed them over the prison walls, while others claim they were smuggled in with boxes of fabric, like we saw in the movie. What we do know is that Dillinger wasn't even there during the Great Escape. Although he certainly set the wheels in motion, he was actually imprisoned himself in Lima, Ohio at the time. Everyone survived the jailbreak, and the only injury was a clerk who was wounded in the leg. Although the movie didn't show it, these men weren't just fellow criminals, they were friends of Dillinger's, who helped him out with some top-tier tips about bank robbing.
I stick with my pals, and my pals stick with me.
One of the confrontations in Public Enemies was between Dillinger's crew and the FBI at Little Bohemia Lodge, where the scene was actually filmed. But Babyface Nelson and Homer Van Meter don't perish there. They actually outlived Dillinger himself. As for Dillinger, in the movies, he muttered something incomprehensible during the final moments, but later Billy learns his last words were, "Bye-bye, Blackbird." Well, that could be true, but it probably isn't. Reports indicate that Dillinger's lips were moving, yet nobody could hear him, and since he was badly injured, he may not have been saying anything at all. The biggest reality of all is that we simply don't know everything about Dillinger's story. There are even some people who believe he lived on, and it was a really good lookalike left muttering, possibly about blackbirds. And it's easy to see why certain details were added or embellished for the purposes of making an entertaining movie, but let's take a moment to appreciate all of the little things Public Enemies did get right, because there was a lot of attention to detail in this film from director Michael Mann's vision to the actors themselves. A lot of the movie was filmed where the events in question actually took place. We have Dillinger's escape from Crown Point, Indiana, the showdown at the Little Bohemia Lodge, and Dillinger's final moments near the Biograph Theater in Chicago. There's also a scene in which Dillinger casually strolls into the detective bureau of a police station and asks about a basketball game. This is another one of those wild moments that actually happened. According to Johnny Depp, Dillinger also attended the 1933 World Fair and asked a cop to take a picture of him and his girlfriend. Never underestimate the power of confidence, I guess. For one thing, Johnny Depp could not have felt more at home in this role if it was being directed by his pal Tim Burton. He felt a connection to John Dillinger since Depp's grandfather was a bootlegger and his stepfather committed thefts, including one which led him to spend time in the same prison Dillinger helped his associates escape from. He was so intent on getting the role just right that he was frustrated to be unable to find any voice recordings of Dillinger himself. So he did the next best thing and listened to recordings of Dillinger's father to get into character and figure out what the infamous bank robber may have sounded like.
And then they just drift away into nothing.
Depp grew up in Owensboro, Kentucky, about 70 miles from Mooresville, Indiana, where Dillinger was from, so he felt as though their accents, movements, and mannerisms would be fairly similar. This star is known for portraying the irreverent Captain Jack Sparrow in the Pirates of the Caribbean franchise, and even he was impressed by Dillinger's brazen accomplishments. This famous bank robber once mailed a letter to Henry Ford congratulating him on making such excellent getaway vehicles. And Depp wasn't the only cast member who took his role seriously. Christian Bale tracked down Purvis's son Alston as a consultant and didn't settle for one brief interview. They spent a considerable amount of time together, and Bale traveled to his hometown and talked to Purvis's other family and friends. Bale didn't believe Purvis had a personal vendetta against Dillinger, and he believes Purvis understood why so many people saw him as a hero standing up to injustices in the system. Like Johnny Depp, Marion Cotillard put a lot of effort into getting her character's voice just right. She plays the role of Billy Franchette, a singer and waitress, which was challenging for Cotillard since she's a native French speaker. She made it her mission to pin down the perfect French-Canadian Wilson Chicago accent and spoke only English for the 3 months she worked on Public Enemies.
Boy, you are in a hurry.
She also traveled to Wisconsin to meet with Franchette's family and learned that her character and Dillinger had bonded over their distrust of authority. This movie was based on the book Public Enemies, America's Greatest Crime Wave and the Birth of the FBI by Brian Burroughs, who had started researching the subject with the goal of creating a miniseries based on his findings. The good news is that Burroughs did plenty of research on the compelling real-life story of John Dillinger. He convinced HBO to get excited about the series, and they made him executive producer and asked him to write the screenplay. And that's where Burroughs got into trouble. It turns out he had no clue how to write a screenplay, and freely admits that his early drafts were very bad. Hey, self-assessment is a commendable skill. Instead, he spent so long writing the book that HBO was no longer interested in the series, so they returned the rights. Burroughs ended up pitching the idea to Michael Mann, who ended up directing, and Leonardo DiCaprio, who was interested in the role of John Dillinger, but ended up turning it down in favor of Shutter Island. Burroughs was relieved he didn't have to write the screenplay himself, and called it the closest thing to fact Hollywood has attempted, although he admitted it wasn't 100% historically accurate. Public Enemies may not be a perfect 10 in terms of accuracy, but a lot of behind-the-scenes effort went into making it a compelling version of the story of John Dillinger.
What else you need to know?
What do you think about Public Enemies? Do you think it was close enough to actual events, or was it way too over the top for your taste? Let us know what you think in the comments section, and make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on your notifications to stay connected with us here at Screen Rant. We'll see you next time.